One of the biggest issues when you get into an old car like this 2001 Ford AU Fairmont Ghia is that the in-car entertainment leaves a lot to be desired. Cars of this era often had a CD player, tape deck, FM radio, AM radio, and that's about it. So today we're actually going to do something about it. This episode of MotoringBox is proudly supported by Century Batteries. And we're going to do it using this thing. So this is a Dasaita 10.2-inch Android head unit. And I know what some of you are thinking. How is a 10.2-inch head unit going to fit in this roughly 7-inch slot? Well, it's rather clever. You see, the actual head unit does fit within a doubled-in slot, but then the screen actually sits out on top. Hopefully we can still get at these buttons here, and then hopefully, of course, we can still get at the shifter. And to be able to fit that unit into the dash in the first place, I've also got this Aerpro doubled-in conversion system here. So this will convert this weird sort of size to a doubled-in slot. So what's actually in the box? Well, we have a user manual. We have some excellent material here for referring to helping with the installation. This excellent double-page document here with all of the wiring. And here's a first look at the 10.2-inch screen. Got some capacitive touch buttons across the bottom, but overall it looks very slick. Here's the doubled-in unit. It's got the mounting bracket on the front for attaching the screen. Has lots of adjustability and lots of connections here on the back. There is a bunch of wiring included, mounting brackets, screws. We've got our universal ISO connector here with the loom. We've got a Wi-Fi antenna. We've got a selection of outputs here for front and rear speakers, subwoofers. We've got a lead here full of inputs, video and audio. We've got a series of USB connectors here which we can put through the car. There's an external microphone which you can put up near the windscreen so you can make phone calls. We've got a GPS antenna, and that's about it. Looking good. Now the Aerpro Dash install kit from AU Falcon has various different components here, from patch looms through to converters for running steering wheel controls. We've got our doubled-in fascia mounting kit here as well, and also these pins here which remove the factory stereo head unit. So we're going to start with that. We're going to pull the pins out of the pack, and you simply need to insert them into the holes on both sides of the head unit here, push them in as far as they go, apply a little bit of pressure outwards, and then pull the stereo head unit out. You do have to angle these things outwards as shown to fully release the mechanism. We can unpick the harness and get the head unit out of the way. From here we're going to dummy up the stereo to make sure it works. So I'm going to install my Aerpro patch harness to the stock standard connector. I've also got this other harness here for the steering wheel controls, which I'm going to leave off for now. But we'll plug this into the head unit, slot the screen into place without any fixings for now, and power the unit on. So the unit fired up straight away. I've got speakers on all four corners working properly. No subwoofer output at the moment, but we're going to fix that a little bit later. So with the head unit pulled out of the way, we can see how this fascia kit is going to work. So there are actually some bits of plastic here which need to be routed out. Aerpro have a fantastic set of instructions to show you that this little nib here on the corner needs to be routed away. There's one on the other side too, and also two areas up the top where bracketry needs to be slid through around the housing. Now we have progressed a little bit here with the wiring. Three things we needed to look at here. The first thing is the steering wheel buttons. There are two wires which needed to be connected here for button 1 and button 2. We also had to connect the signal wire for the amp to let the amplifier know when to turn on, and also the audio outputs for the amp as well. They're shown on screen here with the wiring colors which need to be spliced in, but it was all pretty simple stuff. So this whole loom arrangement here is a little bit messy, so I'm going to use some loom tape to try and neaten things up as best I can in preparation for the new head unit installation. So I've attached the head unit to the bracketry, and we're going to press the fascia into position. This thing is a little bit stiff, so it takes quite a bit of force on all four corners of it to actually clip it into place. From there we're going to install the screen, and this thing luckily has a lot of adjustment. You'll see there's a bracket here with two screws in it which actually controls where the screen sits vertically in position. So you can undo these two screws and slide this whole bracket up and down along the rail. And then there's two additional screws here which control the rotation. So you can rotate the screen roughly where you want it to be, and then make sure that the holes line up so you can put a screw through here as well to lock it all off. Now this screen has to clear the automatic gear shifter which is sitting underneath, but also I need access to these buttons which are sitting right up here near the top of the screen. Because the unit has excellent levels of adjustability, I've been able to come up with a pretty good position for the screen. And with that we can do our screen peel and get a look at this thing in action properly for the first time. So initially I'm going to hotspot this to my phone just to get everything set up. We can map our steering wheel controls, which are actually very simple to do. All you have to do is press the button on your steering wheel and then tell the head unit what this button actually does. So my steering wheel has 3 different buttons here. We've got a source button, which I'm going to use as a sort of back or home button. And then I've also got volume up and down, which I can map to the respective commands in the head unit. So far, everything's working great. We've got sound coming out of every single speaker in the car, and the subwoofer as well is working fantastic. So what I'm doing now is setting this thing up. I'm going to use it for about a week, and now we're going to skip ahead to what my final thoughts are on this head unit. Alright, so I've had this unit installed for about a week, so I've got a pretty good idea about how it works, what I like and what I don't. So first of all, this unit, I'll put the specs up on the screen, but it's powered by a 6-core ARM processor with a clock speed of 2 GHz and 4 GB of RAM. There's also 64 GB of onboard storage if you need it, but in my use case, I don't really care. So let me talk about first what I think the pros and cons are of this unit. The pros, obviously, is the screen size. If you've only got a double-DIN slot to work with, this is pretty much the equivalent of putting a 10-inch iPad straight onto your dash. Although it's running Scout OS rather than iOS or proper Android. Secondly, the adjustment on this gives you a lot of freedom when it comes to the screen location. You can go up or down by quite a bit. I'll put the measurements on screen. You can also tilt it side to side by 30 degrees as well. I haven't got any tilt on this, but I have got it set to almost the maximum level of the screen raising up, just because the double-DIN slot on this dash is quite low. So even though my double-DIN slot was in a rather compromised position, I've got a pretty good result. I can still get to the shifter here, and I can also still tilt this thing if I want to get to any of these buttons here underneath. And the cool thing about that tilt mechanism is it is quite stiff. It's certainly not going to tilt by itself under hard acceleration or braking. So you don't really have to lock that off with screws if you don't want to. Another plus I would say is probably the sound quality, but we'll talk more about that in a second. But when it comes to the negatives I would say the biggest one is probably the fact that you have a large screen hanging out the front of a head unit. You are going to get a little bit of movement or vibration over bumps when it comes to driving. I've been able to mitigate that a little bit in that I've actually got a rubber pad here on the back of the screen. It's like an adhesive one you can get from local hardware shops in a roll of like 10 meters. I cut a little bit of a strip off here, and it just means that the screen kind of presses against the dash a little bit and gets a little bit of additional support, which has pretty much stopped any vibration or movement in the screen. It's powered by a sort of custom version of Android, which is called Scout OS. And what it essentially seems to be is Android 10, but with a skin or a sort of menu system on top. And one of the negatives about that system is the maps. So on the home screen here, when you first turn the car on, this is really what you'll be thrown onto if you don't have it set to go to Android Auto first, which I do. But if you go to here first, you'll see you've got this GPS set up, but there's no maps. That's because this unit only has maps for North America, Canada, and I think Mexico as well. So if you're located anywhere else in the world, no maps for you. So that is a bit of a shame. The main menu is accessed through this little button here on the corner. So you've got apps within the device itself, phone, radio, phone media, local media. It's got a list here as well of recently accessed applications. So you can see Android Auto, amplifier settings, wheel key study. The wheel key in particular was very easy to set up, as you would have seen in the segment just before. Simply hit the buttons on the wheel, tell the unit what these buttons should be doing, and it's all done. If you want to look at every single app on the system, you hit the All Android Apps button. You can see it's already got a whole lot of apps here preloaded, DVR, BT Music, APK installers, but there's not really a way to get to the stock standard Android dashboard or home screen, I guess. So if you want to remove an app, I think the only way to do it is to go into the Play Store, which thankfully is the normal Android Play Store. I don't actually have an internet connection to this at the moment, but you can go into the Play Store, you can add or remove any app you want. So we do have capacitive touch buttons along the bottom here too that seem to work okay. So there are a lot of settings here. The amplifier in particular is pretty impressive. So you've got all of your presets, pop, jazz, classic. I found the flat or the pop seemed to sound the best to me with the music I listen to. And I don't know how many bands this equalizer is, but there are 2 pages worth of bands, so you can go nuts with that. If we go to the next screen here, you've got loudness. I don't actually know what fat is, but it seems to make the sound a little bit quieter, but richer. I'll put that on screen if I can look it up in the manual. I don't use it. You've got your frequency cut as well. You've got bass settings and your subwoofer output too. So I've got the loudness up a little bit. I've got a pretty stock standard sound system in this car, just regular sort of split speakers all around. And there is an 8-inch free air subwoofer in the back. So to me, to my ears, this kind of arrangement sounds pretty good. And you've got your mixer here as well. So you can choose how much volume is coming out of each speaker, where the mix is, you know, is it biased to the driver? Is it just straight in the center? Again, I've kind of gone for this front bias, but I have turned the speakers all down a little bit because I actually did suffer from another problem with this unit, and that is by default, even on the lowest volume, it is too loud. So that was what I looked at first, but there's also another way to solve it, which I found out, which is if you go to the settings, we go to car, we go to factory settings, and the password, which they do tell you, it's not a secret, is 126. We enter there. There's actually a whole suite of settings in here to control lots of different things. You can set a car logo for when the head unit turns on. There's options for what country the radio band should be tuned to. You've got volume settings. It says voice, but I think it's volume. So that's kind of the relative volume for every input or output, I guess you could say, of the unit. So if the radio is way too loud compared to other media you're listening to, you can turn it up or down, depending on what you want to do. There's CAN bus settings here too, which I don't really need. Steering wheel keys, but in the other tab here, there's also a setting for amp volume. So that is the master amplifier volume from this head unit. So by default, it is set to 0. I turned it down to -15, and that's put everything back to the volume level that I would expect. So the lowest volume is nice and quiet, and then you can step up from there. So that is how I fixed it. So if you buy this unit and you have that problem, duck in there, 126, other tab, and then it is down to the amp volume. You can put that on -15. So there are lots of different settings in here: steering wheel keys, amplifier settings, navigation settings, what app it uses for navigation, sound modes. There is a slew of settings to pretty much configure this unit to be exactly how you want. So when this unit turns off by default, it goes into sleep mode. But you can also set a delay here for the unit to stay on before it goes to sleep. To show you an idea of how quick it is, I'll turn the ignition off. It mutes itself and goes to sleep, and we'll turn the key on now. It's already back on. So it's pretty instantaneous. There's no large or long boot time, which is another plus for sure. So this Scout OS, I'm not very keen on it just because it defaults to the map view and there are no maps in my country anyway. So the main draw card for me for this is Android Auto, because I've got an Android device. So if we go to Android Auto, my phone is actually just on wireless through Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, whatever it uses. It takes a little bit to connect, but as soon as it connects, it's pretty quick. So there is a little bit of latency through this system. It's still pretty snappy, and it would be quicker if I actually plugged a USB cable in and just ran it from that, because yeah, wireless is always going to be a little bit slower than wired. But otherwise, it's pretty standard. You've got your maps here. This location is spoofed, so that's not where I live or where I am now. And that's also why it is searching for GPS. You've got your settings here too, typical Android Auto if you've used it before. You can choose whether conversations show up, you can set the wallpaper. There are more settings here if you switch to your phone, just to go through how the Google voice detection works, day-night mode, whether Android starts by default, which I have actually set it to do so in this car. So if we just go back to the Android screen here, turn the car off, the unit goes into sleep mode, turn it back on, it defaults to Android Auto again. So again, because it's wireless, it does take a second or two before you see it start to connect. So when you start your drive in the morning, it fires up beautifully fast. To me, that's the main positive of this unit. The CPU, the RAM, the screen, it's all pretty fast and pretty snappy. So would I recommend this head unit? I would. If you're happy with the price and this is kind of the style of head unit you're after, I think it is a really good buy. Dasaita did provide this to me free of charge when they found out I wanted to actually replace the head unit in my car. I think it's a solid option. Definitely do have a think about your car's dashboard layout though, and if you do have a double DIN slot which is down lower near the gear shifter, it is a pretty difficult installation, but if you do persevere with it, you can actually get this thing adjusted pretty good. If you've got a DIN slot which is higher up, it's going to be a winner. So if you've got any questions about the head unit, do put them in the comment section below. I'll do my best to answer them. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. Consider subscribing, like the video, and I'll see you next time.